So technically you're my first one, because actually I had like one scheduled next week, but you bumped it up. You're like, Saturday, Sunday, when can we do this?
We got to do it now.
Yeah. So thank you. And so I'm calling this Ninjacorn podcast, Ninjacorn, because ninja, we have such a love for martial arts. Unicorn, for just the magical, mystical things of this path and practice that is really anything goes of like spiritual, journey stories, martial arts, and any other kind of magic happening in your life. And I guess to get started, did you want to share a little bit about yourself? I don't know what name you want to use. So
hey, you're the host here. That's like the Zen koan. What is your original face? But like, what's your original name? Whoa!
Oh shoot!
My chair fell. In the context of this, let's go with Sambhava. So my name's Sambhava. I am a Buddhist monk and meditator for the last, coming on maybe 16, 17 years now. Whatever the math is, since 2009.
Right.
And I've been part of a Sangha, the Samvara Sangha within the Rama lineage for that whole time. And very excited to be here today.
Yay, perfect. And so I'm Ekajati, and how I know Sambhava is our root teacher guru in the Rama Mandala lineage. He had students, and his students, yours being your teacher, Ajahn Samvara, and mine was Turiya. And so we had this like intercrossing of spiritual communities with trips we went on and teachings from both teachers. So
I call it we're Sangha cousins.
Yes,
I think that's
how
it works on the tree.
Great word. Yes, we're cousins in the family tree of spiritual practice. And totally wanted to invite you on today to kind of ask you a couple questions. This might spawn into way more awesomeness. So this is just a starting point. I had more and more questions the more I was listing down. So I was like, oh,
perfect. Start anywhere.
Rabbit holes. So let's go ahead and dive in. Yes. What is a hard truth you've learned on your spiritual journey? I know one might be really hard to name, but just you can name many.
I think the constant dance between certainty and uncertainty. So, take something fun, take a nice small thing like enlightenment. The more there's this alternating thing on the path where sometimes you feel very assured and yes, I finally understand, I have my footing on whatever the thing is, only to find out usually moments later that actually you have no idea and the world is vast and infinite and you're one part of it. So that toggle is this very interesting perspective change that will just as part of the cycle of progress always be oscillating. And it makes for a very fun ride. And for doing things like where I'm in practice now, I'm running a spiritual community as the abbot, one of our communities. It's very fun because 1 month you can feel yes, I have a handle on this. I have my arms around this whole thing. Yeah. And then the very next month, feel the exact opposite. And there's a beautiful humility that I think comes from that. And it doesn't seem to go away because the more I talk to people doing this for even longer, the more that it feels like they embrace how much I don't know. Whereas so much of the path is accumulating what you know.
I love that. And I love that because I find more and more in my conversation and communication, my words are possibly, maybe, usually. It's I find myself living more in the gray because that is the way I feel balanced in managing the oscillations that can be very extreme. But
there's a meme. Yes. Sorry to cut you off, but there's a memorable meme of it was a tweet that someone said, whenever I give someone life advice, I always make sure to throw a LOL, I don't know though, in case I ruin their life.
That's so very Gen Z kind of meme style.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, because when beginners or newer students come to you and ask you or share their experiences, where do you kind of find yourself landing in this, the interwoven piece of the oscillations of, okay, this might be true, but this, where do you,
Yeah.
is that
That
question for formalizing?
yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
It changes, and
Yes.
uh, from my current awareness, it's much more a shift into, like, before, I'm an ideas person. I'm a creation energy person. So I love throwing out ideas, suggestions, oh, there's this thing, here's 15 things, and one of these maybe sticks.
Uh-huh.
And that's an important part. What I found more recently is that the listening part before you start sending out the 15 suggestions is probably disproportionately more important. And it allows you to, if you do need to share something, which oftentimes you don't, as you know, it's like sometimes good listening is the key for them to unlocking something themselves, which is way more helpful and useful for all parties. But maybe it's just the one thing, rather than take 100 pictures to find one good one. It's like maybe you just take one good picture. So there's a I don't know, maybe an efficiency that comes from wisdom, but the efficiency has less to do with like anything I'm doing and more of like the environment I'm facilitating. I'm sure you experience this in your practice as a therapist.
Yeah.
But this was like a relatively new innovation for me for the last couple of years.
Okay, but I feel like it's super aligned in kind of Buddhist practices and like in a very Zen way, right? Like that very refined down to one piece and then honing into that one piece, which is, I feel, so valuable today in this world that's so noisy and busy. It's like,
yeah,
you have all these choices. Okay. I love that.
But also in our Sangha experience, a lot of times, people have gotten really good at giving, here's the one piece. And actually it's more interesting now to be like, it depends. What do you think? What's your experience? Like, there's actually insight that comes out that maybe is outside of the one piece. And this is like part of like the exploration and evolution of spiritual practice where, there's a lot of stuff out there. You never know.
Oh, yes. So then, see, on that, going down that piece is like, for yourself, as you're navigating all this, how do you maintain a sense of clarity, and insight for what's the right next thing for you to do? And then what's the right next thing for you to do, right? For someone that might feel very, overwhelmed, with information overload and.
Mine,
yeah.
My formula, I feel like, is getting simpler. And I reflect on Rama had a talk about Kundalini yoga. And his thesis in that talk was that basically when you're doing your dharma, the energy flows. And he gives the analogy of, if it's your dharma to, live in a monastery and focus on meditation, then when you do that, you'll be totally energized and full of all this energy. So he says it's not so much about a meditation practice, just by doing the right thing, it's like the energy will be self-evident. But if your dharma is to be the CEO of a large company, then doing that will give you all this energy. But if your dharma is to be the CEO of a large company and then you go to the monastery, it's like the energy might not work right. So I took that one kind of headline to light to practice in many ways. And these days, the word I'll use interchangeably with Kundalini is enthusiasm. So for me, the driving force is always enthusiasm. If I see something and I get excited about it, it means there's something there. There's a dharma there. There's something to be explored. Right. And when I start to tug on that thread, all of a sudden, the energy starts flowing. And someone was saying, we were just talking about this last night, coincidentally.
Oh, yeah.
And someone was saying in Hungarian, we have many Hungarians in our Sangha, that like the translation for enthusiasm means something along to the effect of to be in spirit, like inspirited, which I love even better than the word enthusiasm. Really so, nice. It's less I'm a very first attention person, like concrete logic, structure, order. These days, I find myself defaulting to enthusiasm more, even when it might not make sense to sort of my logical mind. I've learned to more and more follow the enthusiasm, even if it's on something that seems like a diversion, because oftentimes the diversion leads to the path you were supposed to find.
Right, more creative things. Well, see, that kind of strikes me because I feel like every time I see you or interact with you, you're always so enthusiastic. So what you say is that because you're doing something that's very dharmically aligned for you, and just happen to always I meet you and you're in that enthusiastic space?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big question, but yes, and
Yes.
so I think it's two things. Someone asked me at the spiritual community, like, what's your superpower?
Yes.
And the answer I gave them is I can generally make anything fun. So even if
Right.
it's something that I don't enjoy,
I see that.
like
I see that.
it doesn't take, I will find a way to make that fun.
Right.
So in some ways, like bringing it back to your question, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if anything can be fun, then like, how do you know whether to do anything? But like,
Right.
there's a chaos element, and the best I can describe it, I'm a musician, so you experience this in creativity where there's at some point you just know that when you hear, excuse me, a little melody or a song idea, a little snippet, it will just stick with you in a certain way. And it's not so much like a linear thing. You can't kind of create that. You can sort of foster an environment where that can happen, but it'll just happen. But if it's not happening, you also learn how to not worry about it and like appreciate that side of the process too. But then it creates the circumstance for it to happen. So it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's like that orientation to make things fun will tend to, like, instead of diverting me to things that I'm just like slogging through or aren't important, it'll tend to create the condition where the fun thing will appear and more energy. Like it'll create the thread I can tug on.
Nice. I love that. I love that. You should share that.
It's a very complicated thing to answer. Jai has been asking me for this. One of our residents has been asking me to do this for 2 years, and I've been trying to articulate this thing that's
this teaching.
What's the genesis of like a creative idea and how it grows? I'm like, I have no idea, but
the topic would be something.
We can dance around it.
The topic would be something like how to follow the golden thread of fun or something.
You mentioned the golden thread, actually. So just this was something, I don't know if I've ever shared this with anyone, but this was especially kind of, so I'm 16 years into practice now, maybe around like year 5, once I had my sea legs around things and was really kind of like in a good flow.
Yes.
Something that was very inspiring, and I'd be curious actually to hear. Can I interview you on this?
Yes, absolutely. We can. Yes.
Great.
Collaborative.
Something that was a driving force that I've always kind of naturally had this orientation for is fast forwarding and thinking about things in the present in context of things in the future. So like what I used to call actually the golden thread, which is why I just tugged on it, was that like I'd be sitting somewhere, and I'd be trying, like in the middle of something hard. Like we're trying to have a success with our yoga company. I'm frustrated at work, my practice, whatever it is.
Yes, yes.
I would, one, look at the example of my teacher. I was like, well, at some point he was 5 years in and facing all these same things, but like because he had the wherewithal to work through that, now fast forward 20 years later, we're all the beneficiaries of that, where like he could have just given up, but like everything that came after that would have been compromised.
Yes.
So it kind of like is I don't know kind of the right words to wrap around it, but it's been an inspirational thing to like, in the present, like I would like, there's a golden thread. It like actually goes somewhere off very vast in the future. And I maybe am just aware of this little part of it, but like by doing the thing, taking the next right step, whatever, it like is something that like gives me a little bit more thread to tug on. Wow. And that's felt like actually a guiding force kind of for years. And I've never really asked anyone if they have, like, do you have a version of this?
Well, I was just gonna say that is such awesome perspective, like that, and so insightful. And I have had not those thoughts ever.
Okay, I'm gonna send you a TED Talk after this, and for the listeners in the future, Matthew Dix, he's a professional storyteller, which is a funny thing. already.
Already.
He has a TED talk. The title is something like "Live as Your 100-Year-Old Self Would." It's something like that.
Oh
If you just
yeah.
search Matthew Dix, 100 years
Okay.
old, you'll
Okay.
find it.
Cool.
He talks about a version of this, which is like, we're very conditioned in society to say no to things, like be very protective of our
Sure.
time.
Sure.
And
Yes.
he does the opposite, because the way he experiences life is like, well, the 100-year-old version of myself, like I just ask him, what would he do in this situation? And the 100-year-old version of myself is very simple, because it's like, well, no one's asking me to do this now. So the answer is, of course, yes. Because, so it's like, it's a way of like toggling perspective.
Ooh, that's
Um,
very nice.
and again,
Yes.
it's coming from him, who has this naturally sort of his orientation. He learned it through like a bunch of very difficult circumstances, which I won't spoil. And he talks about in this.
Okay.
But
Okay.
it's like the 20 minutes of the most wild ride you'll experience in a TED
That's
talk. And
awesome.
after it, he gifts you this beautiful kind of perspective.
I love that. But you didn't get that from him. You got that yourself all alone with your struggles, thinking about your teacher.
I got there on accident, I guess.
See, so my like profiling is different in the sense where when I went through my struggle, and I feel like in the earlier years was as I was doing some volunteer service in China before I was like, okay, I'm going to do grad school and do this next thing for my work of therapy. A lot of transformation and changes there. My very core like warrior piece from many past lives came through, like warriors of like generals and lieutenants that was very much like, I will serve, I will be of service, and I just like trudged on. And in very stubborn, belligerent ways that probably was not healthy at all and not balanced, but that was the only way I knew how to do it. Just push through. And thank God nothing broke for good. I mean, it was.
Yeah, I think I came at it from the opposite perspective, and now we meet somewhere in the middle. It's good.
Yeah, really. Oh, good.
But each needs the opposite to kind of get there.
But I feel like now, hindsight 2020, looking back, how much of that rigidity and that programming was coming through, that I've had to shed a lot of that. And the always constant joke with my partner and myself is I'm like A+ student and he's like B+ C. So, and I've shared this before with others, it's like, oh, if I send him off with a grocery list, I'm like, oh, can you give me some cucumbers? And I want like Persian cucumbers, and I want Campari tomatoes, to have this specific flavor. He comes back with regular cucumbers that doesn't have the crunch of the Persian cucumbers, or the tomatoes or the regular Roma. And I'm like, he's like, they're tomatoes, it's cucumbers, it's B+. The B's are beautiful, kind of thing. And I'm like pulling my hair out because
it's almost worse if it's a B+. If it was a C+, then at least it's like there's a gap. It's like the B is like the most frustrating one.
Oh, I think you're right.
And that was my orientation, actually, my spiritual path. I told this to one of my, we have these like Dharma projects we called yoga projects. Yes. And I made the mistake / good fortune of early on telling one of my leads that, sort of like a key karma in my life was being like the B+ student, like getting things to close enough, but like not taking the extra effort to finish it.
Yes.
So that got destroyed at some point. But like not through like the brute force pushing. It was like aligning these two parts of myself to kind of like steer it a little bit. That's where the enthusiasm comes in. Cause like where I will never be a B+ is something I'm really excited about. I'll take that to A++. So it's like, it was like a trick to learn how to align this one part of my being that likes enthusiasm and this other part that like won't finish it. But it's like, but if I'm enthusiastic about it, I will finish it. So like, let's just make that the union.
That's interesting because you make me think of, because I know our teachers very much structured our studies very differently. And for me, it was very subtle and very occult, in regards to the carrots and the rewards. There was never overt like certifications. Here's the, special trip, special gift, whatever blessing. It was never.
You didn't get the gold star and the gold star trip and the gold star.
No. I would have died for that because that's how I'm like lined out, profile
Structured,
lined
yeah.
out to me. It's like, give me a goal, give me the task list. You know, we were talking about this recently with our center, you know, as we're generating the teacher training program.
Yeah.
And all the teachers are giving their little put in of like what is relevant, what would be good. And I was like, and some of them like, this is so overwhelming. Like, who would do all this work? So there were some complaints about it, right? And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? If I had this list, I would have been done.
Yeah, we'd be done by the end of this conversation.
I was like, check, 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 check. You know, A+, where's my certificate? Like, that's how I'm wired.
Oh, it's so funny.
So having the teacher I've had has been such, like you said, the other side of the learning, where I found that when I did projects, worked with her for certain things to get things done, you know, of service and or for the Dharma, there would be this energetic, like power pellet is how I call it. And it makes me think of like Super Mario Brothers, you know, it's like you hit one of those boxes and you get like a gold star instead of just a couple coins, you know, or you have like infinite coins. It's like those, or what I reference, like power pellets for me energetically that bolstered something. And it's like, ooh, yeah, okay, that was a nice little hit. It's like the little energy hit high, right? And then the next, and then the next.
Yeah, we worked on a different, as you said, two very different approaches. And we had a different structure because our Sangha already had, I was the second generation of my branch of the Sangha tree. So we had a generation of older students who did a lot of like infrastructure work, in addition to our teachers. So we had sort of like, we had two models that were operating simultaneously. One, which was like a very heavy reward-based model of like the fun stuff that would happen with our teacher. Because like you could do an amazing thing, like go to Paris and have a gratitude adventure and like this amazing small group thing that like we have, it's just like the coolest thing in the world. But in order to do that, you had to also operate very well in the other part, which is that, okay, we're going to have these projects where we work together and it's clunky and it's not working efficiently. So it's like we always had these kind of two worlds that we would toggle back and forth in between. Because the trick is that you eventually have to learn the power pellet thing, which is often a very subtle thing. But like our way of getting it was like very overtly rewarding it and recognizing it, but then giving you enough energy to then go jump into the slog. And then at some point you figured out in the slog how to power pellet yourself and not get it. But so it's like, so I like to joke, but it's kind of not a joke. It's like a lot of the way we learn selflessness is like we would heavily incentivize selfless behavior and you would get a reward for it. And then at some point you wouldn't get the reward for it, but like it wouldn't matter. It's like training a dog, it's like giving them very gourmet treats and then you like move to kibble and eventually you're not giving them the reward, but like the reward is kind of self-evident. So we learned it from the opposite.
Interesting. Oh, maybe I should share that with Taria because
but as you know, it tends to be like because you had one orientation, you found the other one because of course, and because I had one orientation, I found the other one because of course. Like that's the way this thing works magically.
So interesting. Oh my gosh, that's so fascinating. Okay, I want to go into another question because I could go even more, but there's another question. What would you tell someone who is interested in awakening? And I guess first, maybe let's preface that. Like, what does awakening enlightenment mean to you?
So we're sticking with small questions?
Yeah.
So what does enlightenment awakening mean to me? So this has evolved. And again, the more I know, the less I know. So the way I would answer that question now is a couple of things, which is one, the ability to have an experience outside of self. And, enlightenment is often talked about as like a binary, like a switch, like there's pre-enlightenment, there's after enlightenment. These days, I would articulate it much more as like a spectrum or a circle. It's not something that there's like a higher and lower. It's just like an infinite around that gets wider and wider.
Yes, well said.
So it's a perspective, it's a through line of energy outside of self that anyone in any state of mind has the ability of perceiving. And there are practices and focuses and all sorts of tricks and
Yes.
upaya that, facilitate that. It's not an experience, but that's the best word I can use for it. Like, will foster that experience. It'll create the conditions, like for, if you're coming up with a creative idea, it'll like create the conditions. So like
Absolutely.
creative ideas are more easy to come by. And you learn a lifestyle and practice and orientation that just makes that more and more embedded into your spirit. So rather than like a singular point in time, top of mountain analogy, it's just like a circle that just gets wider and wider and wider and wider and wider, and you experience more and more parts of the circle. And
can I add
I
on
don't
to
even
that?
know. Yes, please.
I think you said it really well.
I got lost.
love your little analogy. Is you made me think of, how I have related to it in the past. It's like this garden, right? And this garden that is of planting of seeds that then we cultivate through discipline and consistent practice to nurture this environment that then blossoms this, like I would call it like the awareness to be, outside of self piece.
So Rama had an analogy that I love that you reminded me of with seeds, where it's like enlightenment is seeded awareness. You plant a seed, it sprouts in this dimension state of mind, goes through many, many other dimensions state of mind, eventually into infinity. So there's like this through line, right? That's like there's a experience of you, quote unquote. There's an experience that can be perceived kind of like through all these different layers. And his other quote that I love, what's the difference between an enlightened person and an insane person? Right. An enlightened person is in so many dimensions at once that they found themselves, and an insane person are in so many dimensions at once that they've lost themselves. So like there's this beautiful analogy of this thing, and like practice is just, you're having awareness of more and more of those dimensions, more and more of that width. Your tree grows in all sorts of different fun ways. So back to your question, what would I tell someone who's interested in enlightenment and awakening? All sorts of things, but it would be more a question back on like, well, what does that mean to you? Why are you interested in it? Right. There, it gets very different. A lot of people, I've taught now for many years. A lot of people come to that, conclusion because they're suffering in some way, and the relief from suffering is, a promise of the premise that they're very interested in, and we all are. For me coming into it, I always had actually a really hard time with that, because like I didn't identify my experience. I would never classify it as suffering. Suffering to me is you're in an impoverished situation in a war-torn country. You don't have enough food. Like suffering is a real thing. And like if my boss gives me a hard time at work and I feel bad about it, like that's not suffering. Like really, like it's a hard time. It can feel immersive and all those things, but like saying that like I was looking for the relief of suffering would not have been an authentic statement.
Got you.
So, it depends on the person and what their interests are. For me, I was very interested in like my suffering was, things feel dimensionally flat sometimes. Like things feel mundane. It feels like there's some magic in life that should be there that I'm not experiencing. And like dissatisfaction was much more of like how I would have articulated that. So I was open for something to like make my life more magical and fun.
Nice.
But like, it depends on the person, and it depends on their starting point in that. And from there, it's like you have this very beautiful roadmap. So I listened to this storytelling podcast recently, this same guy that lived like your 100 years. And he talks about, what a good story will do is you'll take the end of the story, and then at the beginning of the movie, you'll just present the opposite situation, because you want to show like that full transformation. So it's like your starting point, in my experience, becomes your ending point, even though there's not really an ending point, but just for the purposes of analogy. So it's like, oftentimes what you bring into it and like the gaps and deficiencies come to be the things that flip and become, your pathway to enlightenment. And there's so many stories that highlight this in beautiful ways.
100% agree. And
so like that's where I would start, but more from the person's orientation, because then it's like then you chart the course on what that means in that context.
Right. And well said. And thank you for bringing yourself into that of like, well, this is actually what brought me to seek, awakening enlightenment, because I'm right there with you. I very much found such a dissatisfaction with life. I recall, being in my 20s, doing the clubbing, college party days, and I was like, I'd be there and I'm like,
First of all, I love
drinking.
that visual. Just first of all, with your current state, like that brings me joy. But just please
Oh my
continue.
God, hardcore partier. And then, like felt like, because, in bars and clubs, the vibe of like picking up and all that, the kind of sexualized energy. And how many times did I use the line and straight up lied, because I wasn't doing any martial arts. I'm like, dude, I'm a black belt. Okay, just like leave me alone.
See, that's the part of the beginning of your movie, because at the end of it, when you are like, it's the perfect, you just found your opening scene.
You're so right, Sambhava. You're so right. So then they'd be like, whoa, 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 right? And I just remember like everyone supposedly looking like they're having a joyful time. And I would literally, my whole being would be like, I am bored. I am so fucking bored. Like watching all this around me, this whole circus show. And it's like, it was so very visceral, and that would, like you said, I wouldn't call that suffering like on the, war torn kind of, but it was, what I correlated to suffering and wanted something different.
Yeah.
So
So if you came to me asking about awakening, I would talk about it in context of like boredom and excitement and enthusiasm. It's like there's a different like set of words. And
for sure. Because then it makes me want to segue into like, how did you meet your teacher, your sangha, and know that it was for you? Like, did you have a clear like, it's like you're dating, you're spiritually shopping, and also you're like, that's it, marriage, let's go.
So three experiences that all happened within a 3-month period. So ironically, I'll reverse my previous statement, because at the time when I found the Sangha, like I was more overtly suffering than normal, because I had moved to San Francisco and I wasn't working at the time, or maybe I just started working. It was my first kind of like real job. I played a band for a couple of years, and like I was transitioning into this next phase that was like very tumultuous.
Oh yeah.
And my background, just hyper summarize. I grew up in a family of Christian Scientists, which is a offshoot of Christianity that has their own kind of like very unique, kind of strange fringe elements to it. A lot of beauty into it, but like it never kind of fully connected.
Right.
So I was like aware of spirituality and like magic could happen. Christian Science has a very strong focus on healing. So it actually wasn't uncommon for me to know a lot of people growing up that had like miraculous healings of different varieties.
Oh, wow.
So, I was like open to like, there could be more, and like spirituality wasn't unknown to me. My parents are both like very spiritual. I just like their brand of it never quite connected the dots. So I had like for a couple of years just kind of resigned myself, like I'm not going to find that in a religion. I could find it with friends. I could find it in experiences and partying and being in a bit like whatever. I was kind of content with that. But there's just that little layer. Anyway, so I'm a little bit more overtly suffering than normal. I'm going through this big life transition. I'm living with a girlfriend at the time, and we're like fighting a lot. So I would take these long runs through Golden Gate Park. I actually learned how to run so I could like be out of the apartment more to not be in a contentious situation.
I get it.
Converting something into like, well, we can at least make this positive and like get in shape. So I'm running through Golden Gate Park and I see this big pink flyer. And I've been thinking to myself, like, I'm intellectually interested in meditation. Like, this sounds like something that would really resonate right now with these things I'm feeling. I had like read a little bit of like Pieces Every Step by Thich Nhat Hanh. There was something about the vibe that just felt familiar. So right around the time I'm thinking to myself, hey, I should really find a class to learn this, I see this big pink flyer. There are no coincidences, free meditation classes. And it was an address 2 blocks away from my house.
Whoa.
So I go, okay. I'm listening. So I go in. That's where I meet my mentor, my original meditation teacher, who's Savitri, who you know. And Savitri, like in many ways, is like an immediate contrast to anyone I know in my life. I'm like a very loud person. All my friends are very loud. Savitri is this very quiet person. It's like this total contrast. Like you have, like she's talking, and you have to really like lean in to hear her, especially. So there's this energy that was very just different about her immediately. And it had to do with like her yin energy. It had to do with her softness, but she also had this like very clear power. And like the first meditation class, she's like, all right, so enlightenment, meditation, martial arts, scuba diving. We meditate to music and we have a band. And I'm like, what? Like, that sounds insane, but I love every minute of it. So I was very intellectually intrigued. I liked the meditation. We had started doing a tech class basically the next week. So like my second meditation class was like a tech class at Stanford where we're like learning how to code. And I'm like, I don't know why, like, this doesn't make any sense. But it's like for the story alone, I'm like,
yes, for the
this
story.
is interesting. So anyway, so that goes on. So that was, I met Savitri in March. We started tech class maybe in April. We started going to Stanford having tech class. And maybe like a month and a half into that, I met Sambhava for the first time. And he came to a tech class at Stanford. We meditated with him. I don't remember anything exceptionally about that first meeting.
Sure.
Like, we meditated, you know, I'm like new to meditation, so it all feels unusual. Like, I remember I felt really good when Sambhava was giving this talk, but he would talk and like I had no idea what he was talking about. Like, I couldn't follow his cadence. He was using words I'd never heard before, but it kind of felt like I was sitting in kind of like a warm hot tub and just like, I don't know what's going on, but like I feel pretty good. I was kind of rubbing my eyes a lot, but I just started wearing contacts. Like, I don't know, like it didn't seem exceptional. I just like, that was nice.
Yeah, totally.
And so two things happened after that. I'll like hyper condense because this is a wild time in life. But so he invited us at that meditation. It was the first trip open to like any new people outside of his original students for the summer solstice. And they were going to Joshua Tree. And like, this is a big deal. I didn't know because I didn't know anything. So I'm like, yeah, okay, sounds cool. And so Savitri asked me about it. She's like, hey, do you want to go to this Joshua Tree trip? I think it'd be really like amazing. And like, it sounded cool, but it just so happened that my band, we were going to LA that weekend. We had this whole thing planned. We're going to have this big party at my parents' house. And it was like, oh, we got too much stuff going on. So like, sorry, I can't make your weird meditation trip. Like, let me know about the next one. She's like, if you can, I think you'd really enjoy it. And I'm like, sorry. So the universe intervened. And this is the one time in my life this ever happened because my parents had this condominium in Redondo Beach, but they were still living in Northern California. So it was empty a lot, which is why we had these things. So like 2 days later, I get this call from my mom. She's like, hey, really sorry. I know you had all this stuff planned, but like the thing that we were supposed to go do fell through. So like, we have to be at the condo that weekend. So like, can you guys move it to another weekend? I was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I can like check out that weird meditation thing. But it was totally like a universe intervention of like, no, you're supposed to be at this. So like, I'll just get that thing out of the way so you can go to this.
Totally.
And, you know, it's like, I didn't know, I knew one person at this thing in Savitri. And it's just like, the instructions were drive to Joshua Tree, meet at the Ray's parking lot at midnight. And by the way, like, don't do drugs or do something weird. It's not that kind of trip.
Very mysterious.
So mysterious. And I'm like, yeah, of course, I'm in. So I show up at Joshua Tree. There's like 50 other people in the parking lot that I don't know, never met. And, you know, we drive into Joshua Tree at the middle of the night. And I'm like, cool, seems weird. And we go out there. So this is now the second time I met Sambhava. And, you know, we're going out in Hidden Villa. And it's like this beautiful, it reminds me of Thunder Mountain Railroad. It's the middle of the night. I'm like, it really felt like something like, oh, if we were on like an acid trip, like we would be doing all these same things at the same time, but we're on this meditation trip. Like, this is not what I had in my mind that like meditation trip would be like. So anyway, you know, he's doing the Dharma talk. I'm like, not even really listening. I'm just like so fascinated by this place. And like, there's these shooting stars and like, I'm just having this moment, like communion with nature.
Of course.
And around that time, Sambhava says, all right, we're going to do an open eye meditation, which I've never done before. I have no idea what that is. And it's a full moon. So he's like sitting in front of me and stands up on this rock. And he does that like 3 clap Zen thing. And as soon as that like third clap hits, what it looked like, I was wearing glasses. You know, when you have like glasses, you're outside in the cold and you go into a warm room and they kind of fog up and you have to like take them up. Like my glasses fogged up. So I like took them off and I started rubbing them, but I realized as I was rubbing them, like it was still fogging up. So I'm like taking on my glasses, putting on, you know, like doing this. I'm like, oh, my glasses aren't fogging up. Like this dude who's standing on this rock is fogging up. And like, I don't know what that, like, I've never seen anything like this. I'm definitely not on drugs right now, but like something unusual and magical appears to be happening like right in front of me that I have no description for. And again, I'm very first attention. I'm not like a woo-woo crystal person. Well, I am now, but I was not back then. I was like very logical, like what could be happening? Is this a trick of the light? But it's like something like immediately click that like I'm seeing something outside of the description of my worldview.
Totally.
And it's cool, and I have no idea what it is, but I have my journal from the time. I'm a very prolific journaler.
Nice.
And the next morning, he hadn't even opened up like the school for students.
Yeah.
But I wrote in my journal, like, I don't know what this thing is, but I know that if I don't do it and see it through all the way, I'm going to regret it. Like when I'm 80 years old, that I didn't like follow this. So like, there was no structure of it. He didn't even open the school, but I was like, whatever this is, like, I'm going to go down to the end of that rabbit hole to see like what the hell that was. And then like much later, there was like a structure to it. So I was like inwardly, like from the beginning, like, yeah, I've never seen that before. And like, no one else is showing me anything close to that. So like, I want to do that.
Sambhava, that's so crazy. I get goosebumps. You're literally like talking about the movie Matrix with Neo and seeing that rabbit and following the rabbit down the hole. Like, oh my God.
Oh, I followed it right down the hole.
Oh my God. You're
but
Neo.
Like I was Neo, but like I was also like a skeptical Neo. Cause like, still like I'm not just like, yeah, I'm just gonna do all this stuff without questioning. It's great. Like there was a lot of things I was like had to really work through and like managing, my life in this and coming to the place I am now, which right now is a place of balance. Like I have this beautiful Sangha life. I have this amazing life outside of the Sangha. I don't feel a conflict in those two things. But like, my inner turmoil 15 years ago and like my self-identity, this was like, oh my God, I'm this person and I just experiencing this other thing. And I know I'm just going to have to hold on to both of these things and they're going to rip me in half. Like before I knew that, like, I just knew like I'm screwed. And like, I have no idea what happens next, but like, I'm going to do it anyway, because if I don't, I'm going to be mad at myself later that I didn't do it. That was basically like the loop that completed, like in real time.
Kudos to you. Oh my, that's crazy.
It was a wild trip.
Yes. I mean, you make me want to share my little bit, which is totally different.
Yes.
I want to hear is, so I was part of this like self-help group. I went through this whole phase of like real estate business, like conferences and seminars, because coming from Arizona, my mom and I were into real estate. I was like, okay, I think maybe that would be my career thing. And with all these like self-help things, it led to this like goddess program. And this goddess program was an Indian teacher, dug him. He did some martial arts that was very like attractive, right? And in our little goddess group, which is all women, one of the ladies was a student of Rama's. And so we hang out in our little goddess group. Like it was just about really, feminine empowerment, right? Being around other women. And from those little friendships that we made, this one lady's like, we lived close to each other. I was there in La Jolla at that time in San Diego.
Yeah.
It was like, why don't you come over to my house and do a meditation? Like, I want to teach you meditation, right? No idea about Rama, root guru kind of thing. So I was like, okay, meditation be cool. Part of self-help, that lines up, that checks out, make my life better. And I didn't really feel like anything important. And also very similar, like in universe's terms, I was kind of thinking of just like dipping out and not doing the meditation because it was just so nonchalant.
Yeah.
But it came on the heels of this tumultuous relationship that I was dating. And this guy was on the East Coast, super unhealthy, where it's like, oh, I wish you were smaller, skinnier, shorter. So it just really effed with my self-esteem and like my whole gender female conditioning.
Hate it.
So I was in that place and we had officially technically broken up. But on the heels of going into this meditation, like evening, I want to say it was in the weekend, a Saturday or something, he shows up at my apartment door. It's like, oh, I just San Diego. Do you want to hang out? And I was like, oh. And so we ended up hanging out, but it was awful because it was just more of the like, you're not good for me. I can't do this, right?
I hate this part of the movie.
So on that note, more heartache and heartbrokenness after he left. And I was like, fuck, I need relief. And my little weird brain was like, that meditation, you want to go to it? I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah. Cause I feel like
Perfect.
shit. So let's go. I went.
Nothing to lose now.
Totally. I went. It was like 3 of us, super chill. It was like in her little apartment. So kind of like homey, warm, familiar. Played 3 songs, listened to chakra music, and she kind of gave us the template layout of how to like set up a meditation practice to like go home and meditate. I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
That was that. And I was like, right?
Cool.
And so me and her continued to hang out. And then I feel like in a month or so's time, it was February and it was Rama's birthday. And, he had already left the body, right? So these were his students wanting to honor his birthday. And they ended up renting an auditorium at, I want to say USD, because USD is in La Jolla.
Yeah.
So it was like this college lecture hall. And, a couple of my teachers, my mentor, I would say, friends, got together. They had some cake and they're planning on just kind of going into this lecture hall, having a nice time, eat some cake and meditating. I was like, okay, fine, I'm down. But the energies was clearly up. I mean, I wasn't so sensitive to all this because I just watched my mentor. She was like all kinds of like spracked out. She's like, I need to get the I was like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah. Like, seems weird.
Yeah. So we go into this lecture auditorium hall, and it has very much kind of Rama's original students vibe. It's like they're all very like inaccessible, and it has a little weirdness. You're like, what the hell's going on? And I went with 2 of her like students, I guess you could say, and they were a gay couple, and they're all like glomming onto me. They're like, this is so freaky. You don't look scared at all. I was like, actually I am, but I'm just like not showing it off.
I love it.
Next thing you know, they play music, and they play music from Rama's Samurai album where he talks.
Yeah.
And I had never heard his voice talking and with the music thing. And the moment I heard his voice and we're meditating, and the room was dark, they had shut down the lights, tears just started streaming down my face. Because I was like in outer space, and I was like, oh, I'm home. Like, I've been looking for you. I've been looking for my home. And it was just like, I landed, and was just so like, it was such a deep, heartfelt homecoming. And so after that, I was like, I'm in. What do I need to know? What I need to learn, right?
I want to be an A+ student in this. And I'm like, I want to be a B+ student in this, but also like do my old life. So like, if you can help me navigate that.
I'm all in, like drank every Kool-Aid juice possible. And my mentor just went all out and kind of broke out, Rama's little structures, like, okay, discipline, get a job, career, get martial arts. And then, and she'd tell me about her trips scuba diving with Rama and stuff. And then after doing that for a year with her, I was at a temp job. So it didn't land. So I ended up going back to live with my parents in Arizona. And at that time, my mentor and I just kind of parted ways, but I felt like I had the core pieces just continue to practice. And I did. And the whole premise was, she's like, this whole lineage is very covert operations. I'm like, okay, what do you mean? She's like, you're not going to find anybody else that's teaching publicly. Like, you just need to do this on your own. And so I very, very much.
Interesting.
Yes. I very,
very opposite from my experience.
I didn't know you guys were there. So I felt like very lone wolf in Arizona doing my little practice. And then one day, one of my girlfriends in San Diego was like, I walked into the center in Ocean Beach called Dharma Center, and I had all these posters, and I think it's from the lineage of Rama. I'm like, no way, that's baloney. But I went to go visit her, and I checked it out. And I ended up sitting with one of the teachers. I was like, okay, I feel like I found a connecting piece. So I'm not so lone wolf.
Yeah.
And eventually, as I went back to visit over time, I ended up meeting Taria. And like, she was one of the only teachers I remember like hearing her verbalize, oh, I take students and I work with students. And as soon as I heard that, I felt that opening, and I was like, I want in. I want in.
Pick me.
But as the story goes, because I was so all in, she's like, well, I don't know. I need to feel you out.
What a perfect. No edits. Perfect.
So
First draft
any
is
of the teachers were
final.
like, okay, fine, come on in, you know, but so I went on this probationary period with her, you know, for however couple months. I'm literally not joking. And what that entailed is I would come and visit San Diego pretty consistently to happen to engage my friends, right? But see her, but also super go to the meditation trips that she had lined up for the Dharma Center group.
Yeah.
So she can see my vibe when I'm on these trips and how I interacted and all this stuff like that. And so eventually at one point she gave me the application and I applied. So for me, you know, Tria was absolutely my teacher, but from the heart of it, and I've said this before, I know it's this weird, you know, way to delineate. It's not always the best in our Sangha lineages. There's ST1s, 2s, 3s, 4, 5s, right? The generation. Yeah. Rama was alive in his body for the students of ST1s and 2s, right? And then any one that came after would be 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever.
Yeah.
So with me, I feel like I wanted to come into this world and this lineage as a ST2. Like I felt that hardcore connection with Rama to be and meet him in the physical body, but I actually landed as a 3. And then I feel like I operate and I playfully have like the heart of 4, you know, and maybe of 6, you know, 2, 3, 4.
That's so fun. Yeah, that's like such a good description.
Because
that's interesting, because I'm an ST4 like through and through. Like any other configuration before this, I would not have lasted at all.
Oh yeah.
So like 4 was like the perfect conditions for like my flower to bloom. And I appreciate all the like, but like it never would have worked. This is the first time it would have worked.
Fascinating that you feel so like solid in your 4. Yeah, I feel like split in all those different ways. But so
I mean, I feel a deep affinity to Rama, but like I know if I was around in New York as an ST2, like no chance. Like, I just would have fallen right out of there.
No, I get you. I think it just speaks like the love that I have for Rama, that like I would have loved that physical, you know, first attention experience with him, but it wasn't meant to be this life. But so that's my story of how I met my teacher. And
oh, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. We call that in our bit, that's your Sangha origin story. They're always fun.
How I was birthed and baby. Oh my gosh, it's already 2:26. Do we have time for one more question, or do you want to stop here? We can.
No, I'm great.
So next question is, I know this is a big thing, but before we go into that one, what is masculine power versus feminine power to you?
Ooh.
And that can go down in so many different ways, right? And I guess what is my point of asking that? I'm asking that because one, being embodied in a male body this life, like what is your perspective been on this path of like what masculine power, you know, means for you versus feminine yin power? Yeah.
Okay. I mean, let me give you like a short answer and a medium answer to make this not a whole other 3-hour podcast. But so to me, the short answer is the masculine and female energies, they're a balance. And that's kind of the oversimplification of this. It's like, there's a polarity, there's these 2 aspects, there's these 2 dimensions, and they like meet in this like perfect harmony, perfect unity. I like the word harmony better. I'm a musician, you know, it's like there's a harmony, those notes come together, they create a beautiful chord. And the longer answer and sort of how it's manifested on my journey is that, you know, I'm born as a man in this incarnation or whatever. And from very early on, like identified very heavily with the females in my life, like starting from mom all the way up to present. You know, there was sort of like parts where like in bands I would be around like mostly dudes, but like for every basically situation I had choosing an agency in, for like most of my life, I would like choose and surround myself with just women. And there was something about like that energy, that experience, part of from the polarity, but also because like I identified so many aspects of that I liked better, that I felt like just worked better and just made more sense to me in a way that like hanging out with dudes like didn't produce the same effect. There was a different kind of thing I got from that. And like in the band, in like a music setting, being a band together, that was the configuration that really worked. But basically outside of that, I
No.
didn't have a lot of interest in that.
No
So
sports.
even like
No like boy
eh,
sports stuff. Oh.
eh, not my
Ah.
speed. Music was always been my thing. I was in the marching band, not the football team. Like it's
Right,
always
right,
been.
right. Okay.
So like in bands it made sense. Like that configuration of dudes made sense, but that's like a very close quartered, very different thing than just like men in the world. And also, you and I have talked about this before. Like I come from oh no, we haven't maybe. So in my life experience, I could think of like, I can count on one hand the number of like happy old men in my life that like I felt lived amazing self-fulfilled lives that I would like want to trade places with. I could basically think of two before I met Sambhava. So one of the very interesting things, me as a fast forwarder, I'm like, well, all the men in my life seem like pretty unhappy the more they age. And there's this thing where they like curmudgeon and become so like, it's just like, it's not a good scene out there.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what's the alternative? And the alternative was I had a college professor who had multiple PhDs, who was like this freak unicorn of like life. That's like, I can't emulate his life. Like that's insane. But like, and I had a Sunday school teacher growing up that was like a happy older man that like seemed very like happy and fulfilled, but also like there wasn't a lot there I could emulate because it was like so far from my current experience. So when I met Sambhava, who at the time was like maybe my age now, like when I met Sambhava, I was like, here's a young dude, relative to, everything else. I was 27 and he was 40.
Yes.
And it didn't feel so far away in life experience that I couldn't relate to it, but it was also like, he had had some years and some wisdom, but he was still like a young, vibrant dude who was just seemingly having the most fun of his life in everything that he was doing. It had all this opportunities and freedom to like do all this. I'm like, yeah, show me what you're doing. Like that sounds great.
I got you.
But in the Sangha context, and we've talked about this, is just like, there's a whole teaching of like male conditioning and female conditioning, those things coming together. That's like a very interesting, very deep-seated thing. And for me, like coming into that, like I was just all the Sangha women. I was like, hopefully they'll accept me as part of their tribe. They won't notice too much that I'm actually a dude, but like I just want that experience, because the difference is in hanging out with Sangha men and Sangha women is with the Sangha women, we would talk about the Dharma and all these amazing things, and everyone was so excited and have all these things to share. And I hang out with the Sangha men and it just was like flat. I'm like, oh, well, like, yeah, I'm all in on the women. So much, much later, and it wasn't until maybe like into the advanced teachings where I'm teaching a meditation class in Oakland, and the universe, like the place I was teaching, they lose their lease. It gets taken over by the Oakland LGBTQ Alliance. So like all of a sudden, after like basically like avoiding hanging out with other men for like the last decade, I'm in this situation where I'm hanging out with only a group of gay men of color. And it's like the most wonderful experience because I actually like have this experience with them that mirrors my experience with the Sangha women. I'm like, oh yeah, this is possible. And like probably like I need to pay attention to this and actually like work to foster this rather than just like avoiding it. Because as you know, the longer you go, the less you are, the less you can avoid things that you don't want to like face. So that was like a turning point that actually like, okay, now I have a good experience with this. Now I have some enthusiasm for it. And like now I can follow that in where, it was easy to just not.
So then I have a question for you. I know this is like weird geeking out stuff. Is like, do you know in your most recent incarnation, were you a female then?
I have no idea. I have very little awareness of any of that. And I like spend no time thinking about it. I have a huge orientation to the 100-year-old version of myself and like
future
handshake agreement that we need to make in this incarnation. I have no idea what the 100-year-old version of myself in the last one, like, done deal on that one. I mean, I have like inklings, but like it feels, from what I can sense of it, it feels very male. And like I will meet people along my path. Actually, Agni Kala is a great example in this. Like, that just feels to me with no evidence or awareness of this as like, well, this is the type of person that would have been my older brother in like hundreds of past lives. Like there's that kind of connection that like feels immediately familiar and like, okay, got it.
Okay, because I bring that up because I feel very clearly, and Therese has confirmed this. My most recent past life was actually male, and I feel that, and I can still tap into that in my being. And sometimes
I could totally see this.
you totally can see that. So I was talking to someone else, and just like, yeah, I can see that in you, Ekajati. And I know it throws my husband like for a loop sometimes, because I literally will have moments in our earlier days of like dating. I'm like, okay. It's like, can you just like scoot close a little bit? So we're sitting in the back of the car and my legs are spread wide open. He's like, can you like close your legs? Like, give me some room. I'm like, no, I need room for my junk.
I need my space.
I need
You're
my
just
space.
man spreading.
Make comments like that. He's like, I don't understand you. You are weird, but I love you. Let's go. So
that makes perfect sense. And actually a lot of the women in my life like have this same kind of orientation where there is like actually like a lot of like masculine like decisiveness, like that kind of energy.
Yes, I can see that.
And it's not that I have like the other side. I don't know. It's a configuration that's always worked. Mudra read my chart at one point, and my Mars and Venus are like right next to each other in this very kind of like androgynous configuration.
Yeah. Oh yes, I can see that.
So like, yeah, that kind of like blending, that's always sort of made sense.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. No wonder we get along.
Awesome.
It's like dudes in this incarnation, nothing. Past life dudes, I'm all in.
I guess so. So then, what are some illusions or delusions you've had, like eye-opening, insight around with spiritual practice or awakening?
You want like a top 5, or I mean all of them? I don't know.
Top couple.
First one that comes to mind. I don't even know like how to articulate this one, but it's like it's easy to have ideas about enlightenment and the progression and what that will be like. And
yes,
one that I've had to face continuously is, like assuming you're going to be at a certain place by the time you get there,
right?
And then like being very surprised when your current experience is different. So like I had this moment going into, there's 3 phases of our practice essentially. Beginning tends to be a pretty long middle, and then like the advanced teachings.
Exactly.
And I assumed because we're in this wide middle, and there wasn't a calendar date I could align to, that like advanced would come somewhere down the road, and by the time I get there, surely I will have worked out this karma, this samskara. I'd be having this kind of meditation, and like by the time it goes in, then I'm in a perfect place to just like everything's great and to bloom. Yeah. So when we got the advanced teachings, which for our Sangha and me happened in 2019, it was following success in one of our yoga projects that I was on. So we had a company that we exited from. It created this like very big dharma that like facilitated the next part of practice. So I'm like elated and riding this huge high.
Hell yes.
And then my next thought was like, oh shit, like this feels too early. Like I'm not ready to become an advanced student yet. Like I still have all this stuff that I was supposed to have worked out by now. Like it's not worked out yet. Wow. So I felt like I went immediately into a scramble because I feel like I had to cover lost ground. And then I decided to strategically go the other direction and just not worry about it, which turned out to be a much better strategy. But there's that feeling like, oh, it's going to feel a certain way. And then when I get to that experience, it doesn't feel like that. And that, the first couple of times can feel very harrowing. And then like later it becomes different. And like, that's the beauty of it. You don't know what anything is going to be like. But, thinking about this, when you get into like enlightenment or enlightened states of mind, it's like, oh, well, clearly that means my idea is that everything's going to be amazing and beautiful. And like these things that like annoy me or push my buttons now will be gone. And then much to my surprise and joy, like, no, none of that's actually gone. Some of that can actually be like more acute in certain ways. So it's like you're just refactoring this like constant relationship and this constant dance of but that's the beauty of it, because like you have more and more awareness the more you go of this through line that like even in the really hard struggling parts, like actually you're able to connect to the light and perfection of it. It's like it's a very complicated thing to explain, but like it's never how you think it's going to be. And even if it was, that would be a letdown because there wouldn't be anything else. So it's like there's always this element of surprise, chaos, magic, and something that like will get in your way. There's this analogy recently. I've been trying to bake it into a Dharma talk, but I'm just going to keep saying it out loud till it's there.
Okay.
Agnikala, when he was with us last weekend,
Yes.
was sharing this insight that, you know, when you tell someone not to do something, or like a kid, it's basically the way to ensure that they will like want to do that thing. Like, don't pick up that thing, and they'll be like, oh, I want to pick up that thing.
Hell yes.
And you know, it's like, don't think of an elephant right now. It's like your brain will think of an elephant. So
Yes.
there's a thing that like you will respond to don't by like grasping to the opposite. And so I was thinking about this. I was like, oh, you know, like Padma Sambhava, of which like my name is inspired by, like
Yes.
flagship teaching, don't be attracted, don't be repulsed.
Uh-huh.
So I was thinking about like, what would be the way to frame that same thing in a way that doesn't do this don't thing? And I was thinking about like, you know, attracted, repulsed, it's kind of like a magnet. So like essentially what he's saying is like, be demagnetized. And I was thinking, so I was researching like, how do you demagnetize a magnet?
Yes, okay.
And it turns out the way that you demagnetize a magnet, I got really excited about this. So like the enthusiasm started kicking. The way you demagnetize a magnet is with heat. And heat has like many parallels in our practice, because heat is like kundalini.
Yes.
So it's like, in one way, like you generate internal heat, and that's a way that you break through like karmas and samskaras, these like attractions and revulsions. Like heat will literally like demagnetize yourself. But also in the context of like a sangha and your life, it's like, if you don't have any heat in your life, then it's like you can't demagnetize, or not fully at least. So it's like you actually need this kind of like input and chaos and disappointment and things to like actually give you something to generate that heat that will like generate the ability to demagnetize yourself even further. So it's an interesting thing, because it's like your mind is like, oh, I just want to like go to this situation where I'm completely demagnetized, but like to get there, you have to go through heat. And it's like, but I want to avoid the heat, but still be demagnetized. And like, you can't do that. So it's like, you actually learn over time to enjoy the heat and appreciate the heat and like see the heat in a different way, because it's actually like part of this natural cycle, rather than something that you can like remove to experience this benefit. Like you can't skip that step. So it's like this wild ass koan of like,
but no, I love
that's a constant surprise.
I love the heat piece, because I am like such a paro in so many ways. And so,
are you a fire sign astrologically?
No, air, Libra.
I'm a water sign, so there's like the, you know, the polarity.
Yes. Because so when you talk about the heat, it makes me think of fire, right? And the fire in that alchemical process that happens in all these ways that, you know, if you're taking the fire element out, but just looking at heat, you can put it also into light, right? And
yeah,
something I've been playing with, because each of the chakras have like an element attached to it. And I was geeking out on a Netflix like soap thing, which I do not recommend anyone waste their life on, but I'm so into that.
Put a bookmark on Netflix. I have a funny story for you at the end of this. Keep going.
There was this bad guy, long story short, super hybrid, give you some context. Bad guy that was able to generate hellfire, and this hellfire was his power, right?
Ooh.
But in his growth and his transformation, he was no longer that bad guy, and he lost his power for hellfire. So then people were trying to like take over and his kingdom, blah blah blah. But through his transformation, he ended up coming out and having, they called it glazed fire, and the glazed fire was described as compassionate fire. And I was like, oh, that's so Buddhist.
That's the thing, baby.
And I just like, so then I was thinking, okay, in relates to our chakras, navel, you know, chakra, fire element, right? Sacral, water, root, earth, heart, what is it? Wind, air, and then, you know, space, ether, throat, you know, light, you know. So I was like, okay, what if I took my navel chakra and I connected it to each one of my other chakras? What kind of fire, what kind of heat would it create? Like I'm doing like chakra combinations in my brain. Does that make sense?
Have you ever read the Tibetan Yoga of Secret Doctrines book, the W.I. Evans Wentz book?
Oh, sounds familiar.
So he talks about the process for doing the tumo in a very similar way.
Yes.
Because you're like generating through the navel, like the inner heat that like then you like take up through the chakras, and they do all these different
melts
things and
this and that. Yes. but going back to your thing about how this generation of heat, just taking just for example, navel and water sign, sacral chakra, right? And that gets what, you boil water, and that the boiling of water, if you look in our first attention world, is so,
steam,
disinfecting, right? It's cleansing, right? You boil away the impurity. I'm like, my gosh, there's so many things to go off that heat. So yes, I 100%.
Yeah, there's a whole 3-hour podcast just in that right there. But
Yes.
going back to your original question,
Yes.
like that has been the thing that's always been the surprise, because it's never like you think it is. But in that, like, that's the beauty of it, because if it was how you think it is, it's like it would be boring again. And going back to our shared conundrum here, it's like when it's boring, it's not fun and there's no enthusiasm. So it has to be exciting. But in that, it's like that's the koan, that spiritual practice just gives you infinite amount of options to resolve.
And I feel like that's such a positive way for you to say it's beautiful, because I feel very like rebellious and very like grumpy and skeptical, because I was like, it doesn't always feel beautiful to me. I mean, if I'm being honest and super, it feels jarring. It feels like shock induced. And especially from our practice, when I like reach more and more levels of sensitivity, it's like stimuli overwhelm. It's almost painful. You know what I'm saying? It's not painful to the extent of, I think, how people associate with pain, but I don't know how else to kind of describe it.
I mean, I describe it like, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like, I experience it as like a very like almost manic sensation. It's like, it's not painful in the fact that like it hurts, but like it's oftentimes like so much and you can't turn it off when you want to.
Right.
And it's like there's like a visceralness quality to it that like needs to express. And that's been the interesting thing, because like I don't know, like we talk about in our Sangha, I don't know, I talk about it in our Sangha. It's like each person is like this little like experimental lab of innovations. So we call our advanced students Shodans, so it's a martial arts term. Yes. So it's like, people have different Shodan innovations. And, like, because they're running their own little experiment. And from that, they learn something from the experiment that they bring back to everyone else that like helps the whole scientific community.
I love it. I love it.
Because like my experience of that same thing is like I have the exact same thing. And when it's an individual thing, it will be like I will rebel against it. But like for me, like that is almost entirely sidestepped if I'm in a facilitation role for other people. So like
what is
so
that?
like so you're talking about like when you reach this state where there's this conflict, or it's not like you thought it was, it's like this very painful kind of thing.
Yes, so jarring.
But like the sidestep I found in my practice, I don't know if this is a weird me thing or whatever, is like if I'm not in me mode, but if I'm in a facilitation role for other people, that will like almost entirely like go away or just miss me. So like I'm in this position now where I'm running this spiritual community in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Yes. Most of what I'm doing and how I'm applying this like manic energy when it comes on to me when I get in these like over enthused modes is like it goes into not me trying to resolve that or off gas that so much as like, oh, I'm going to put this into this event that we do for this group, and like that energy then becomes the fuel to like facilitate this other thing, and then like something different happens. I can't describe this in like a first attention, and it's not like a foolproof thing, but this is like it's like the flip side of what we learn in our practice. Like the easiest way to get yourself out of a bad state of mind is to help someone else out, because it like sidesteps this internal thing, and just like by like recontextualizing it here, and then it expresses in this totally different configuration. There's like the other side version of that, which is like the interesting that our Sangha is going through like a very interesting transition now, because like our teacher transitioned out of like the head teacher role. We're moving to this like, the Sangha is the Buddha is the Sangha is the new Buddha. It's like this very different configuration, but like actually what we're learning both individually and collectively is like, oh, if we put our thing just into the whole, like a different thing, the energy works differently than if we're just like having our thing and trying to figure out our thing off on an island. I think it's very interesting.
No, I hear you saying, which is very much a core of, I feel like, this practice and journey is taking self and putting it into selflessness, right? Through service. That's what I'm hearing
Yes.
you mention.
I would never articulate it in that same way, but you're right.
Okay, yeah, and I see that from you guys being a huge superpower in your guys' community, your guys' ways of being of service, not only for the younger students and generations, but also to each other. It's so awesome and so amazing to watch because you guys' size numbers just has that very visible, ripple effect outward.
Yeah.
Because for my sangha, it's like 5 of us, and so it's much smaller. So service happens.
Which is interesting. So, because for me, like, I love the small thing. Like, this is too big for like my normal orientation. I'm like the band. The band is like 3 to 5 people. So again, you end up in the configuration that you need, not the one you want. Like, no edits.
Wow. Yes.
Perfect.
Thanks for pointing that out. Oh my God. Okay. So, I see how you are not bypassing the energy, but actually I hear you, effectively using the energy through service. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, like, I don't experience it through service. Like, again, selflessness is one of those words to me. It's not that it doesn't mean anything, but like, it's never like a conscious thought. Like, I experience it as fun or enthusiasm. Like, it's fun to do this thing because if it's just my thing, I trip out in my own head about like, is it as good as what I ever thought? But as soon as it's a we thing, like, I can enjoy it in a different way, and like it's actually easier for it to be fun and not experience that like disappointment. Uh, what's the word? It's just easier for it not to feel flat when it's like as soon as I bring other people into it. So it's like it's more fun to do that, and then you just learn over time, like, to do it the fun way, even if that's not like the natural orientation. So like it is selflessness. It's just funny because I'd never like think of it as that. And I think about this like more from like the tantric perspective. Like, Padmasambhava didn't kill the demons. He converted them into Dharma protectors. It's like taking the natural energy of it and just moving it a little bit to the left so that it could be dharmic instead of karmic. And like that to me is the thing I think about a lot, which is like, what's the energy of my situation, whether it's in the sangha or at work or by myself in my life? Like, what's the energy I'm experiencing it? And like, if I need to change it, how can I just take that same energy and just like shift it a little bit rather than try to like push back on it or have this whole like,
that's
that
really
work,
great.
right?
Padmasambhava, super Padmasambhava energies there.
Yeah, we could have a whole separate podcast about Padmasambhava and that adventure, but
wow, that's super rad. I love it. I love that seeing that you're sharing, because that's not how I would see things. Yeah.
But that's the beauty. So like, this is the key innovation of like a lineage. I talk about this a lot, and I talked about this with Agni Kala recently because this was like the first time I had this realization was with him.
Yeah.
Is that like the way that like a lineage works, and I experience this all the time with the source sangha, the source Rama sangha we're all a part of, is that there's so much you can only experience so much in the human body, right? Like, I'm an ST4 in a certain configuration in this sangha. I never got to meet Rama in the body. It's like I have certain restrictions on like what my awareness can hold and experience like in this configuration. But other people that are in the same spider web that we're all connected in have that experience. And when they share that in a way that becomes accessible, and that way of being accessible could be Turiya writes a book about her experience with Rama, which she did, which was very helpful. I'm very grateful that she did that because I get to now experience this thing in the network that like brings me an awareness that like I couldn't have possibly experienced. And in the same way, we get to have this conversation together. You say this thing that is that we're talking about the same thing, but you're using totally different words and energy. It like unlocks something like, oh, I would have never thought of that as selflessness, but like now that you mention it. So it's like this like sharing. It's like I feel like the key innovation in the network, Rama has the talk, the network tribe, like is that when we share into the network, like that's the key part. Like that's what illuminates the whole network. It's not that like we're all hoarding our little nodes. It's like that there's supposed to be this interaction and cross-dimensional chatter that happens. That's like the feature, not a bug. Because sometimes we'll experience that like from the negative side as sensitivity, like, ooh, people are going through stuff and like I feel it. But I'm like, the thing I'm excited about is like, oh, there's all this stuff and like I get to experience it, and like we can actually do things to facilitate our interaction and experience. So actually like more of that happens. So like we invited Agni Kala to Bodhi Mandala last weekend.
Yes.
So it's like we took a node from one side of the spider web and moved it into this one, and then they got an experience that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And like something happened in all
Wow.
directions in that, whether you were there in person or not. But like something happens from that, and like it makes the network wider,
I
stronger,
love
more
the
connected.
work that
Something.
you are doing with that. I really do. I super, super respect that and admire that. Your enthusiasm knows no bounds and
Enthusiasm. That's my
knows no bounds.
my
Yours.
contribution. But like good, like that's what else is there, right? Like if this was boring, neither you and I would be sitting here having this conversation.
No,
Like
absolutely. No, absolutely. No. 100%.
we would have ran out of things to talk about an hour and a half ago.
I mean, just being mindful of time and so you can have a break and we can definitely do another time. I love that. Is any questions for me as like a closing thing, or is there something in closing
My
you want to
God.
share that you're like, wait, actually, I want to go back and I want to add this piece?
No, I have like hundreds of questions for you. But if I was to like,
We can do one.
yeah, you don't even need to answer this in this podcast, but just like food for thought. I have 2 questions for you. 3 questions for you.
Maybe we can answer.
I'll throw out all 3 and answer one at a high level.
Okay.
So, first question, I'm very interested about your experience with your new name. So when we met, you were known to me as Hathor, and you recently went through a transformation and are now known as Ekajati.
Yeah.
Those are like very different, just primordial energies to begin with.
Yeah.
But having gone through a name transition myself, that's a very multi-dimensional, multifaceted experience. I would love a 3-hour podcast on just that name or the short version.
Let's do a podcast, you and I, just on names. Your name transition from
Love.
Chi
All right.
to Sambhava, and then I'll do mine. We'll do that.
Okay, so we'll table that question.
Yes.
Second question, I would love to hear about your description. What does enlightenment mean to you right now? And third question, I'm very interested because you are in a relationship where you are in the Sangha and have a Sangha life. Your husband is not. And I have like infinite amounts of questions of that experience.
Yes.
Because that's such an amazing experience and something in my Sangha we never really get to hear about. And actually not just for me, but probably for like dozens of other of my peers, just actually hearing your experience of that would be very beneficial and amazing. So food for thought on all of that, but take whatever you'd like in there and answer.
Okay, so I say let's schedule another podcast for our spiritual name talk, and we'll title that spiritual name transitions. And let's do another talk with relationships. And I'm happy to, share the recording that you can share with your Sangha mates, afterwards.
Maybe this is the Boma talk when you come back, but we'll work something.
Okay, yeah. And oh my gosh, what a big question. I don't know how you answered all my questions so well, because they were big questions. And I was like, I can't even imagine what he's gonna say. I think you did great.
But this is the thing, you're going to talk to 10 other people and they're going to articulate, and it gives you a vocabulary that you didn't have, because having gone through, like, you hear other people's things. This is the magic.
Absolutely, I agree, because I'm just the way you share things. It's like, oh, and I agree. That's not how I would have said it.
Yeah.
So awakening and enlightenment. This is going to go past for a couple minutes, so mind that.
Take your time.
Okay. Like you, I had a very, very, personal idea of what enlightenment looked like to me in the context as I was a student that went from beginner to intermediate, looking at my mentor, my teacher, and Rama as kind of models of like possibly what enlightenment will look like for me. And after that model, which was very similar to what they look like, pretty much, it's like, okay, teach, in some public way, and be of service. That's very much Turia's thing, hugely service-based and for the greater good kind of a thing.
Yeah.
and make sure your life is dialed in tight and balanced so that you can support that. And that's more or less the high level template. I was like, okay, that, and be happy like all the time. Happiness
Helps.
that was a big thing. And then everything of that just kind of blew up after the advanced teachings, because all that kind of A+ striving, thinking that I would get to the end, and multiple times Taria mentioning to me, it's like, there is no end, and this doesn't finish.
Yeah, but where's the end?
No, I was exactly that. I don't know if you remember, she came to give a talk to your Sangha, and I was like, so you're saying there's no retirement after this, after we're done? She's like, no, you're never done. She like specifically said that, and I blurted out, I was like, no, I'm gonna fucking retire and be done. She's like, no.
Yeah,
I kept hearing, but I didn't hear it. So I kept working and to be done. And done for me was awakening and in the enlightenment piece. And what I came to realize, very much like you, in all the messiness of the advanced teachings, because advanced teachings was I just felt any kind of sludge in any way, shape, or form of any like sewage system in my body happening that was hanging on backlog. That's what came up during the advanced teachings. It's like
interesting.
Fresh water and sludge, and it's like, oh, got to deal with that sludge. That could be.
I had a very opposite experience. We should do another podcast about this, because that's
really
fascinating. Yeah.
It was very tumultuous for me. Sludge meaning like a lot of, emotions and attachments of how I thought things should be, right? Versus how they just were. Broke through a lot of like rigidity and constructs of, I think also a lot of my past life profile with that kind of military warrior piece that was very structured. And it's like, wait, I hit this, I did all the parameters for this, like in a martial arts dojo, and I didn't get my black belt. What's going on? Kind of thing. So it was really messing with me. It was really messing with me.
I love it.
And then it was also really generating, if I'm being super honest, like underlying like resentment stuff that was really coming up. Resentment is like, wait, I felt like I got the wool, the rug pulled out from under me. And there was like a super interesting phase in the advanced teachings where I was grumpy out loud, where in front of my teacher, in front of my Sangha, I was like, this is bullshit. I said that. I was like, this is and there are other students that have advanced teachings, and then there's like newer students, and they're looking at me, and I was halfway them like, oh, you can't say that. I was like, no, but this is fucking bullshit. This is just, I was like,
gotta say it.
And my thing that I was griping about was like, I felt like I got sold these invisible seeds, invisible beans, if you will, and I planted them in this invisible garden, and it's all this invisible bullshit is what I was kind of really sitting with. And I was like,
oh my God, I love this.
Because I worked.
This is a great part of the movie.
Because I worked so hard. I mean, that goes back to the A+. Like I worked so hard and I went above and beyond and everything that was like, what? So after going through that whole phase of this is bullshit, I had to get clear with, okay, then why am I doing this? Do I keep going? Like real questions. And do I say give up, kind of thing? Like how would I just give up? And
that would be a violation of a very key part of this too.
And
can't do that.
Deeply in a visceral warrior level, you never give up. So I was having this very interesting conflict in that way.
Oh God, yes.
Okay, so this is why it felt very tumultuous and didn't feel, don't get me wrong, there were moments where the meditations, the samadhis were so high and bright, but the other side, this was churning. This was really, really churning, my being. And so the giving up did happen, right? But the giving up looked very different than what I thought. I've in this very egoic way, the giving up felt like it meant failure, and all this, and a lot of deep grief and sadness, because it's like all that I worked for this, it just is like ashes, sand falling through
Yeah.
your hands. So I was like, oh, really, really grief inducing actually, and
Yes.
dramatic, super dramatic. But in
Love.
this super deep grief dramatic thing, there's these bright moments of light, and like my awareness opening and opening, like you said, in that circle that just expands, and things are sprouting and connecting. And so I would find myself literally feeling like I was going crazy, because I am deeply sad and grieving, but then I was happy simultaneously. There was no either or. It was like this. It was like a ball, like this. Like literally the experience. And I was like, what the heck do I do with this? And something that Taria had mentioned, early in the days when we would talk to each other and have conversations, like, the you stop at one point practicing, because the practice like practices you, like it undoes you, the doing does itself, and it does what it needs to do. And so that's where I kind of gave up, and that's where my surrender happened, where I was like, I will just continue to sit and meditate, and I'm just going to sit and meditate. And when it feels kind of dark and sludgy, let's see how to kind of like bring in and like kind of reconcile with that light brightness, and find some kind of balance, and just keep going. And yeah.
Yes.
And so awakening and enlightenment for me was very much this, that koan, finding some kind of like harmony, as you would say, and assimilation that felt very whole. And that wholeness, that expansiveness, right, I would say, is awakening to me, in a very grounded way that was very, in hindsight, beautiful,
In hindsight, yes.
And
That transition part, a little rocky, but we got there.
super rocky, right? And like you said, and as Taria has said, there's no end, and it's not done, because there are still moments where it'll feel sticky, right, in the awakening process, even though things have been grounded and rooted and occurred, kind of thing, that life is still happening, right? And we're still, like you said, we're like weaving energies in the appropriate way. But now
the integration process, yeah.
But now we are this conduit fully of enlightenment, that when we weave it, it can be very powerful and very amazing, right? And beautiful. And so that's what I continue to kind of go back to.
Wow.
And humor, oh my gosh, which was my earlier talk I was talking about earlier today, is like, I'm realizing people, it's a lost art, joy and laughter and play in spiritual practice, because that has helped be a huge balancing piece. It's been super clarifying too, to be like really intensely this, and all of a sudden bust out in full on laughter, but like, oh yeah.
I mean, it was one of Rama's key innovations, humor.
Yeah. And he was so funny, And
wow.
I mean, dare I say the word prayer, because that sounds so religious, but like a prayer I genuinely have for myself, besides, praying for clarity all the time, is pray to be funnier. Like, I'm seriously for that shit. I don't want to lose my sense of humor. It's such an asset, right? And such a power pellet
Huge.
for this path.
Power pellet. Thank you for sharing that. That's very beautiful. Like, just my tantric commentary, first idea, best idea, as you say, like my favorite part of that is when the energy is there to give up, but the solution was to give up, but a little to the left. Like that's the move. It's like, it's actually following that same energy, but it's just like following it in a different and unexpected way, or it following you, or, whatever the analogy is. But like that, like so directly speaks to the heart of it. And it's funny because I didn't experience completely different to that, but similar, and how I like throttled the give up, but give
Yeah.
up in
Oh
the
yeah.
way that's right. I shorthand to just do both, because my experience
I
of
love
this
it.
was always like there's this two parts of it, and it's like,
Yes.
well, I can't reconcile this part here with this part here. I can't reconcile this part of me that like is connected to light, and this part of me that still has all these karmas and
Yes.
samskaras.
Right.
I couldn't reconcile this part of me that like wanted to move to Hawaii but also wanted to run this thing in Bodhi Mandala. Like it was all this thing, and it didn't come up in the same way. But like the very like simple answer to this was, we'll just do both. Like be in Hawaii and be in California. Be this enlightened part of yourself and this non-enlightened part of yourself. Which is the same thing as just giving up the illusion that there's two. But like I love people's articulation of the same thing. Always comes through different words in a different way. That's essentially the same thing.
Right. And I love what you're saying with doing both, because it that is absolutely part of awakening, which is being able to integrate in that multidimensional way all of our beings and all the realities and all the boths now. And that's, I think, what I feel Turiya mentions when she speaks about the perpendicular path. It's like it's this way, it's here now, instead of like somewhere out there in a linear way.
Love.
Yes. And you made me think of, so I'll share 2 minutes. This is the visceral feeling. I don't know if you had a visceral feeling when there was like the initial awakening. For me was, I don't usually feel my crown chakra. And the moment that it happened, it was like I literally, because I would have these bright, beautiful moments of meditation. So I would feel light, streaming in. But for the moment of like the initial awakening, I literally felt like my last 3 petals or something go blink, blink, blink. And I was like, oh.
See, okay, we need a whole nother separate podcast on this. I had a very different experience, and like again, it's like it's hard to capture this in like one experience when it's really is this like
Yes,
concatenation of many experiences.
many.
But mine was like very much like I had an initial experience that was very much like a trick of that was like very subtle, so subtle that actually like had it not been clocked in certain ways, like I would have breezed right past it. And then also convinced myself when I got like angry a day later that like, oh, well, clearly that wouldn't have been the thing because I'm not supposed to be angry. Like it would have been very easy to miss had it like been in any other context where I was like actually like looking for something different. Like so subtle, like a gentle breeze subtle.
I'm with you.
And then, it wasn't until actually months later when Phoenix passed, we'll talk about this more in the like name change podcast, that I had like the opposite, where I had this very overt experience that like, so it's like, it's never one thing. It's like this collection of all these things, but like, that's when Turiya says it doesn't end. Like it doesn't end. You just keep having experiences. Some are subtle and profound. Some are huge and overt. All of them make you look back at the experiences before and like it recontextualize them in some bigger way. So like, how do you point to any one thing? It's like it's kind of a fun joke, but it's so beautiful to hear those stories, because it's like that's the spectrum. It's like it wasn't like you weren't enlightened before, you were enlightened after. It was just like you had more awareness, the spectrum moved a little bit, and you see that there's still a spectrum that's infinite. It's a circle. Like I don't know. Where do you start the circle?
It's like literally the Buddhist joke, right? And I think that's where, in hindsight, when I say I was so grumpy about saying this is bullshit, is like, I think I was tapping into the realization that I was like, I think I'm part of this joke and I don't like it.
All right. Yeah. Here's the ending of your movie. So you're pissed off because it's the joke. You pray to God for humor, and God's solution to that is the liberate. Like this movie writes itself, man.
So pretty much you're saying I fucked myself over. Yeah, I get you.
I mean, that's going back to what's the first thing you tell someone who wants liberation? Yeah, it's like you're fucking yourself over, and you're gonna have to learn how to not do that, or you're gonna have to do it in like a more funny way,
and be able to laugh about it. Oh my gosh, don't tell that to a beginner. Good God. I might put
it's
a
so
warning.
true though.
Warning.
Yeah, warning, do not listen to this.
Do not listen if you're a beginner practitioner.
It's not gonna help. Oh yeah, so thank you. This is beautiful. I mean, I could keep talking for like 3 hours, but
It's so awesome. And I can't wait to hear what people say in the whole song. Oh my gosh. Fun. Thank you for being so brave. Thank you for being you. You're awesome. And I just feel
you're
like
awesome.
because I just super admire how you know, walk, you know, the spiritual world, spiritual path with first attention world and all the things that we
I feel like I more dance it, but you know, walk's good too.
No, you absolutely dance it. Was probably some rave glow in the dark lights. That'd be you.
Cool. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Until we meet again, I will look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye, Sambhava.
See ya.